Don't abandon your values because they are the compass that guides every decision you make and the foundation that holds your identity together. When you enter into a relationship, it can be tempting to bend or soften those values just to keep the peace or to avoid conflict, but that is where the cracks begin to form. The moment you start telling yourself that what you believe isn't really that important, you start chiseling away at your own worth. Values are not small preferences or fleeting opinions. They are the deeply rooted beliefs about how life should be lived, how people should be treated, and how you should treat yourself. If honesty, loyalty, respect, kindness, or faith are part of your core values, then no amount of love, attention, or attraction should ever convince you to set them aside. Compromising on them may feel like an act of love in the short term, but it always creates long-term resentment because you eventually realize you gave away something sacred that can never be fully returned. Think about it. If you abandon your values for a man, what you are really saying is that his comfort, his approval, or his desire matters more than the principles that shape your character. And while that might buy you temporary harmony, it costs you your integrity. Without your values, you don't have a solid ground to stand on, and you end up building a relationship on shifting sand. The problem with shifting sand is that it moves with the tide, and when the storms of life come, everything collapses. The man who truly deserves your heart will never demand you to betray yourself to keep him. If he does, what he really wants is not a partner, but control, and control has nothing to do with love. There are countless people who end up looking back on relationships with bitterness, not just because they were hurt, but because they realized they gave away pieces of themselves they swore they never would. They let things slide that went against everything they believed in. They allowed lies because they wanted to avoid an argument. They allowed disrespect because they didn't want to seem too difficult. They accepted excuses instead of accountability because they were scared of being alone. Every single one of those choices chips away at self-worth until you wake up one day feeling like a stranger to yourself. And once you lose sight of who you are, it becomes nearly impossible to find peace in any relationship because deep down, you know the version of you that your partner loves isn't even real. Holding on to your values is not about being stubborn or inflexible. It is about knowing where your line is drawn and refusing to cross it. A man who respects you will see those lines and stand on the right side of them. A man who doesn't respect you will push and push, trying to see how much you're willing to sacrifice. That's where your strength has to show up. You don't have to raise your voice or fight endlessly. You just have to know that if your values are on the table, the conversation is already over. Because once you prove you're willing to abandon them, the bar keeps lowering. Today, it's a small compromise. Tomorrow, it's a bigger one. And eventually it becomes a pattern where you don't even recognize your own reflection. The real danger is not just losing your values, but losing the respect that comes with them. A man can sense when you stand firm in what you believe, and he can sense when you are willing to fold. When you fold, you don't just lose his respect, you lose your own. And when respect disappears, love cannot survive. You cannot expect someone to honor what you dishonor in yourself. Relationships thrive when two people bring their whole, authentic selves to the table, and that includes their values. If you cut pieces of yourself off to fit into someone else's idea of love, you are not being loved, you are being managed. Your values are not negotiable. They are not up for trade. They are not conditions you only hold when it's easy. They are the exact things that keep you steady when love gets messy, when emotions run high, when temptation comes knocking, or when challenges feel overwhelming. The strength of your relationship will always match the strength of the values it's built on, and if you throw yours away for someone else, you weaken everything in the process. Holding on to them might cost you certain relationships, but abandoning them will always cost you yourself. Don't lose your independence because it is one of the strongest anchors of your identity and one of the most attractive qualities you can bring into a relationship. Independence is not about doing everything alone or rejecting connection. It is about having a sense of self that exists outside of the relationship, a life that belongs to you regardless of who you are with. Too often, people fall in love and immediately begin to orbit their entire existence around the other person, abandoning their own goals, their own friendships, their own routines, as if the relationship is the only thing that matters. At first, it can feel romantic to be consumed by someone, but eventually it suffocates both people. A healthy relationship is built on two complete individuals choosing to share their lives, not two people erasing themselves just to keep the other one close. When you give up your independence for a man, you are silently teaching him that his world matters more than yours. You cancel plans with friends, you stop chasing your passions, you let your career take a backseat, you even stop nurturing your own inner growth, all to make sure he feels prioritized. But love doesn't require you to shrink your world down just so someone else can take up more space. A man who truly values you doesn't want you to disappear into his shadow. He wants to see you stand tall in your own light. If he discourages your independence or makes you feel guilty for wanting your own space, that is not love, it is control wrapped in affection. Independence is where your confidence grows. It is knowing that you can take care of yourself, make your own choices, and build your own joy without waiting for someone else to hand it to you. The truth is, the more independent you are, the more magnetic you become, because independence communicates strength, self-respect, and direction. People are drawn to those who have a life of their own because it shows that you are with them by choice, not by need. Needing someone to complete you might sound romantic, but it creates pressure that no one can live up to because no human being was ever meant to carry the weight of being someone's entire source of happiness. Losing your independence often starts small. Maybe you stop going out with your friends because you think he'll feel left out. Maybe you stop pursuing a goal because he doesn't support it. Maybe you start asking his permission for things you never used to ask anyone for. Little by little, those pieces add up until you can't remember the last time you did something just for yourself. The danger here is that when your entire identity becomes tied to the relationship, you start to tolerate things you shouldn't because losing him feels like losing yourself. And when you reach that place, you no longer make choices from strength, you make them from fear, which is the fastest way to trap yourself in something unhealthy. A man who deserves you will never feel threatened by your independence. He will celebrate your wins, encourage your growth, and push you to keep building your life because he knows that your independence makes the relationship stronger. Two whole people coming together create a partnership that is rich, resilient, and balanced. But when one person sacrifices their independence, the relationship becomes lopsided, with one holding all the power and the other clinging desperately just to stay afloat. That imbalance never lasts without pain. Independence also protects your mental and emotional health. It means you have your own outlets for stress, your own support system, your own passions that keep you fulfilled, so you don't drain the relationship by expecting it to meet every need. It keeps you from being overly dependent, overly insecure, or overly fearful of being left, because you know you can stand on your own 2 feet. This doesn't mean you don't love deeply, it just means you love from a place of strength instead of desperation. And when you love from strength, your boundaries are clearer, your confidence is higher, and your choices are healthier. Independence is not a wall that keeps people out, it is a foundation that keeps you steady. Without it, relationships become shaky, because one person is always sacrificing too much just to keep the other one satisfied. With it, you bring balance, you bring energy, and you bring a sense of security that both people benefit from. Never lose your independence for a man, because if the price of keeping him is losing yourself, then what you have isn't love, it's captivity dressed up as devotion. Don't ignore red flags because they are the signals that warn you about what's coming if you choose to stay blind to them. Red flags rarely scream at you in the beginning. They whisper. They show up as little inconsistencies in his words and actions, small moments that don't sit right with you, behaviors that make you second-guess yourself, and comments that chip away at your peace. The problem is, when emotions are strong and the attraction is powerful, it's easy to convince yourself that those whispers don't matter, that you're overreacting, or that things will change with time. But ignoring red flags doesn't make them disappear. It only gives them room to grow bigger, and by the time you face them, the damage has already been done. The cost of ignoring red flags is always higher than the cost of addressing them early. Maybe you see that he avoids accountability and always shifts the blame onto others, but you tell yourself it's just his way of coping. Maybe you notice he talks down to people in ways that reveal arrogance or disrespect, but you excuse it because he's charming with you. Maybe you realize he's inconsistent, sometimes affectionate and sometimes cold, but you convince yourself he'll get better once he's more comfortable in the relationship. Every time you choose to justify these red flags, you are handing away your clarity in exchange for a false sense of security. Deep down, you know the truth, but you keep covering it up with excuses, hoping love will be enough to rewrite his character. Red flags matter because they reveal patterns, and patterns are stronger than promises. A man can promise you the world with his words, but his patterns tell you the truth about who he is. If he shows you he can't handle conflict with maturity, if he shows you that honesty is optional for him, if he shows you that respect is conditional depending on his mood, those patterns are not accidents. They are habits, and habits shape the quality of a relationship far more than intentions ever will. To ignore those patterns is to pretend that love alone can fix someone, when in reality, love does not heal what a person refuses to change. One of the most dangerous parts of ignoring red flags is the story you start telling yourself. You convince yourself that what you're experiencing isn't as bad as it feels. You downplay your own discomfort. You tell yourself he has a good heart and he doesn't mean to hurt you. You cling to the potential of who he could be instead of accepting the reality of who he is right now. That's how people stay in relationships for years, tolerating behavior they swore they would never accept because they keep holding on to the fantasy of change instead of facing the reality of the present. Every red flag you ignore today becomes a bigger issue tomorrow. What starts as dismissive comments grows into disrespect. What starts as little lies grows into betrayal. What starts as inconsistent attention grows into emotional neglect. These are not random accidents. They are previews of the future, and your willingness to acknowledge them determines whether you end up in a healthy relationship or a painful cycle. A man who is worth your love will never make you question your peace. He will not force you to overlook behavior that contradicts your values or compromise your standards just to keep him. But a man who benefits from your silence will happily let you ignore every red flag because it allows him to keep doing what he wants without consequences. That is why noticing red flags is not enough. You have to act on them. You have to trust what you see more than what you hope. You have to remind yourself that your intuition exists for a reason, and when something feels wrong, it's because something is wrong. Ignoring red flags is essentially bargaining with your own future. You are telling yourself that you're willing to gamble your happiness, your peace, and your self-respect in exchange for temporary comfort. But the truth is, there is nothing more expensive than a relationship built on ignored warnings. If you want real love, you have to be brave enough to call things what they are, no matter how much your heart wants to believe otherwise. Because the moment you stop ignoring red flags, you stop betraying yourself. And that choice will always protect you more than pretending things aren't as bad as they seem. Don't compromise self-respect because it is the foundation of how you teach others to treat you and the mirror through which you see your own worth. Self-respect is not arrogance, it is not selfishness, it is not an inflated ego. It is simply the recognition that you are valuable, that your time matters, your feelings matter, and your boundaries matter. The danger comes when love starts to blur those lines, when you begin to tolerate things you never thought you would just to hold on to someone. At first it might feel like you're being patient or understanding, but the truth is, the moment you compromise your self-respect, you've already set a dangerous precedent. You've told yourself and the other person that your dignity is negotiable, and once that door is open, it never closes easily. Self-respect is what keeps you from apologizing for things that are not your fault. It is what stops you from chasing validation from someone who withholds it as a form of control. It is what reminds you that being loved is not about shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's expectations, but about standing tall in who you are and allowing the right person to appreciate that. Without self-respect, you lose the ability to enforce boundaries because you start believing that asking for what you need is too much. You stop calling out disrespect because you fear conflict. You stop demanding consistency because you don't want to be seen as needy. All of that might maintain the surface level peace in the relationship, but beneath it, you're slowly eroding your own sense of value. When you compromise self-respect, it doesn't just affect how he sees you, it affects how you see yourself. Every time you let a dismissive comment slide, every time you allow broken promises to be excused, every time you accept behavior that contradicts your worth, you are sending a message to your own heart that maybe you're not as deserving as you once believed. That inner dialogue becomes toxic, and before long, you stop recognizing the strong, confident person you used to be. You start settling for crumbs, convincing yourself it's a meal, all because you've convinced yourself that asking for more will drive him away. But here's the truth. Self-respect never pushes the right man away. It only pushes away the wrong one. A man who values you will rise to meet the standard you set because he knows your worth requires it. A man who only benefits from your lack of boundaries will accuse you of being difficult when you start standing up for yourself because your strength exposes his weakness. That's why holding on to self-respect is non-negotiable, because it reveals who is truly capable of loving you and who only wanted to take advantage of your silence. Self-respect also defines the energy you bring into every interaction. When you respect yourself, you carry yourself with a quiet confidence. You know when to walk away, and you don't waste time begging for what should already be freely given. You don't settle for attention when you deserve commitment. You don't settle for apologies when you deserve changed behavior, and you don't settle for temporary affection when you deserve lasting respect. That posture of self-respect is not only magnetic, it's protective because it shields you from becoming trapped in cycles of mistreatment. The reason people compromise self-respect is often fear. Fear of being alone, fear of losing someone they love, fear of never finding better. But fear is a terrible decision maker. It convinces you that lowering your standards is safer than risking loss, when in reality, lowering your standards guarantees a deeper kind of loss, the loss of yourself. And once you lose that, it doesn't matter if the relationship survives, because you'll always feel empty inside it. The truth is, real love cannot survive where self-respect has died. Love requires mutual admiration, mutual honor, and mutual care. If you're the only one respecting him while he disregards you, that's not balance, that's imbalance disguised as devotion. Holding on to your self-respect means walking away when someone refuses to give you the basic level of dignity every human being deserves, even if your heart still wants to stay. It means remembering that your worth is not determined by how much you can endure, but by how firmly you can stand in who you are without apology. Self-respect is not a luxury in love. It is the very ground you stand on, and once you let it slip, everything else starts to crumble. Don't silence your voice, because your voice is the instrument through which your needs, your truths, and your identity are expressed. A relationship where you feel unable to speak openly is not a partnership. It is a cage. Too many people fall into the trap of holding back their thoughts and feelings just to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, or to prevent the other person from pulling away. It can feel easier in the moment to bite your tongue than to risk rocking the boat. But over time, that silence becomes heavy, suffocating, and destructive. Your voice is how you communicate who you are, what matters to you, and what you will and will not accept. And once you lose it, you lose yourself inside the relationship. Silencing yourself might feel like a form of protection, but in reality, it is self-betrayal. When you don't speak up about the things that bother you, when you suppress your needs because you're afraid they won't be met, When you withhold your opinions because you fear judgment, you are sending yourself the message that what you think and feel doesn't matter. That message sinks deep into your self-worth, and soon enough you begin to believe it. The longer you remain silent, the harder it becomes to reclaim your voice, because silence turns into a habit, and that habit becomes your new normal. By then, you're not just hiding your voice from him, you're hiding it from yourself. The irony is that silencing your voice does not prevent conflict, it only delays it. Every unsaid frustration, every unexpressed boundary, every unspoken truth piles up inside of you until it eventually bursts out in anger, resentment, or emotional withdrawal. What could have been resolved with honest conversation early on becomes a mountain of unresolved issues that feels impossible to climb. Healthy relationships are not built on silence, they are built on communication, and communication requires courage. You can't expect someone to understand your heart if you never let them hear it. When you silence your voice, you also silence the chance for growth in the relationship. If you never speak up when something hurts you, the other person never has the opportunity to learn, to adjust, or to change. By staying quiet, you rob both of you of the chance to build something deeper and stronger. And if he resists or punishes you for speaking up, that's not a sign you should stay silent. It's a sign he is not the right man for you. The right person will lean in when you speak, not shut you down. They will value your honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, because they know it keeps the relationship real.